Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to another edition of the BigFooty Bombers podcast for season 2021. I'm your host again for this evening, Bonser34, and I'm joined again by the man who is the power of our board, and that is TheGrizz. How are you this evening, Grizz?
I'm doing well, thank you.
And you still like being called the power of the board?
It doesn't sound like I've got much of a choice, but I'll take it. It's not the worst nickname.
And we are, of course, joined, as I said last week, by our resident draft and recruiting guru in eDPS. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Got around to watching a few games of footy today, even though I couldn't go to them at Vic Country areas, but good to still watch a bit of footy.
Excellent. Well, we will come back and ask you a few questions about that shortly, but we will just quickly do a review of last night's game. Now, unfortunately, I think in the end the margin was unflattering. I think we certainly deserved to be a lot closer than what we ended up being, especially after hitting the front early in that last quarter. eDPS, I'll go to you first, Mo, just to get your thoughts. But I mean, I looked at the game and went, that's probably why Richmond are the defending champs. You know, they hit us early, and certainly the pace of the game seemed to surprise us early. We managed to stick with them, but then they just landed that knockout blow late and sort of showed why they are the champs and the benchmark for the comp.
Yeah, I think I saw that they scored over 100 points from turnovers. So whenever any club makes a mistake against Richmond, they make you pay. Like they don't muck around. I don't think we would have seen too many missed targets, especially going inside 50. They're just so efficient in that regard. So, I mean, you just have to bring your best, and we did at times. We didn't quite do it as well in that first quarter. Took a bit to get going. We were great with them from the second quarter till, midway through the fourth. But you just got to capitalise on the opportunities. We had opportunities at a goal that went begging. I mean, that's just the big difference there. They're a well-drilled outfit. They've got a lot of players that have a lot of experience and finals experience. I mean, we've still got a very young group come through that have had no finals experience. So this game, even though it's a loss, it's going to teach these kids a lot.
Yeah, Grizz, it did certainly seem late in the game that Richmond drew on that experience. I mean, they have had the big game experience that we've sort of been lacking. I mean, we do play relatively big home and away games, Anzac Day, etc., but that's nothing like what it turns into come finals time. So do you think that actually played a part? And, what did you think about last night's game?
Oh, yeah, I think I think experience showed tellingly. I think what we saw was a comparison between a team that has won 3 of the last 4 flags. They know how they want to play. They're really structured up. They're disciplined in how they stick to those structures. And from the start of the game, you could tell they knew exactly what they wanted to do. And you're probably right. In the first 10 minutes, we didn't show much resistance. But I think the experience and the knowledge and not letting the big game overwhelm them, whereas I think we were sort of deer in the headlights to begin with a little bit and just didn't go with them. And we sort of adapted, like eDPS alluded to, from the second quarter, start of the second quarter to midway to the fourth. The game sort of hovered around that 2 or 3 goal margin, and it sort of didn't move from there, showing that we were able to break even for the most part. But the game was sort of won in the first 10 minutes where they got on top of us, and that last 10 minutes where I think it's pretty clear that, that experience shone through. They knew they had us in terms of running power. We had lost McGrath and Zaharakis, and when they put their foot to the floor, we just couldn't go with them. And I think that comes with experience. It comes with, most of their players having 5 or 6 AFL pre-seasons under the belt, whereas we were a very young team, a lot of guys in their first, second or third years, and that just sort of showed a little bit. I think they just knew what they wanted to do and took it away from us late. Although I think, ironically, our younger guys like Cox and Parrish and stuff probably showed more than some of the senior guys late as well. But yeah, I think I wasn't expecting to get in front in the last quarter. I thought that was a really good effort, but I think that sort of spent most of our petrol tickets by that point.
Yeah, look, I'll admit, I actually I was at a mate's place for the first 3 quarters, and I actually started the drive home. It's about a 20-minute drive home, just after 3-quarter time, because I thought I'd seen enough, and I thought Richmond would probably just going to keep us at arm's length like they had most of the night. But then obviously we hit the front, and I was carrying on like a pork chop in my car. But unfortunately, by the time I sort of got home, we'd fallen into a heap, and I managed to see Richmond kick the last 3 goals of the game, which I probably shouldn't have turned on and just gone straight to bed. But I mean, I was certainly proud of the way they played for most of the game. For mine, I think the defining moment earlier was when Guelphy got tackled. I think he got the ball and he stopped, he propped, he looked, and he probably had that time to process the options against Fremantle, West Coast, North Melbourne, and I think he thought that he still had that time last night, but Richmond are just a completely different beast. Were there any moments to you, eDPS, that stood out there where you thought, geez, we just haven't come to play the way we had the last 3 weeks when we managed to win relatively comfortably or rather comprehensively, I suppose?
I think it was in a few of those lapses in concentration from a few players. I thought defensively we weren't quite there. I mean, you lose Snelling, who's been one of their best players at that. You've got Andrew McGrath, who goes down early. He's another good defensive-minded mid. And just down back, just a few guys not quite doing what you need to do. I think Phillips on a few occasions wasn't nailing those marks or killing the ball when he did go down back, whereas at the other side it was Chol who was doing those things and just missing those opportunities at goal. I mean, we had quite a few late in that game to really nail it, like Stringer with that snap at goal that he just usually take a little bit more time to kick, but just didn't get at that time. But, I mean, you can't have a go at Stringer for too much. I mean, he's won so many games for us over the years. I mean, that's just one that he'd like again, but I'd expect him to win us a lot of games this year.
I was just going to say the perceived pressure that Richmond put you under is incredible. Like, they'll get you for the first 3 quarters, and then that last quarter where we've got the ball and we've actually got time, you wouldn't know it. They're just hacking the ball in the boot. Stringer's taking one less step than he would to kick that, because they've just put you under the pressure for the whole game. And with Guelphy, he's brave as they come, but he has some real lapses in awareness where he just doesn't understand the speed of the game going around him. And he had a couple of those moments. He had one in the third as well where it was just he just got nailed. He didn't even know the guy was coming, even though everyone around him was screaming at him.
Yeah, no, and I was just going to say, eDPS, you obviously can't see me, but I was nodding along with everything you were saying then. And something I actually read on our board, and I haven't fact-checked this at all, but I'm just going to accept that it's true, as everything on BigFooty is always true when it's posted. We averaged 10 tackles inside our forward 50 a game, and last night we only had 2. Now, I actually raised probably 3 weeks ago that Snelling was actually leading that stat for us. So I think when you said that, we lost a bit of pressure because we lost him, I think he was a huge loss last night. Now, he obviously wasn't the difference, but I think players like that are probably a little bit underrated. But Grizz, how did you see our defensive matchups? Because we did see ETHDog's dream matchup of Francis on Martin a couple of times, which didn't really work. But, I mean, we're happy with how the defence lined up. I was surprised not to see Laverde sort of go to Rewalt more often than he did. But how did you see it?
Yeah, I thought with our defence, they do a lot of handoffs, so they want to get Ridley zoning off to take intercept marks. So we do a lot of handovers, so it's hard to sort of get isolated one-on-one matchups. But I think whilst a sort of makeshift defence with Stewart and Laverde stood up last month or so, I think playing Richmond was a different kettle of fish. I thought Francis did okay on Martin, as well as you can. I think when you're playing with someone like Dustin Martin, you've got to just understand that he'll probably get off the leash 2 or 3 times a match and make you pay from inside 50. But I thought Laverde did a decent job on Rewalt on the times he was on him. But I think similar to what eDPS was saying before, in the sense of Richmond were just streaming through the middle and the efficiency going inside 50 was really good. Now, I'm not sure our defenders could do much with some of the entries coming inside 50. And that partly was also coming off half-back. I think we've had 2 players inside the top 10 for tackles inside 50 this year, one being Snelling and one being Waller. We're missing Snelling and Waller was on one leg for half the match. So I think it was pretty telling. We just couldn't put any pressure on Richmond coming outside defensive 50, and I don't know, for whatever reason our structure wasn't manning up throughout the ground, so our defenders were isolated one-on-one a lot. And when you're playing against guys like Bolton and Martin, Rewalt, regardless of who you have on them, I thought Redmond did all right. I thought Ridley did okay on Martin at times, but I was surprised we didn't send Laverde to Martin at times. I thought it was a good matchup for him, but overall there wasn't a lot I think our defence could do at times with the way Richmond was moving the ball.
And I think eDPS, we also saw, I suppose, a different side of Rutten than we've probably seen this year. I mean, so far, apart from the Port Adelaide game and maybe even the Brisbane game to an extent, we have actually had a fair bit go our way. So he hasn't really had to change much up. But no Snelling, and as Grizz just said, Waller was on one leg last night. So he actually threw Hind forward, which was a surprise move to me. It's probably not a move I would have made, but it didn't go too bad, I suppose. But how did you see Truck last night? I mean, I think we saw him throw a few players around, and I thought, it wasn't a bad idea to maybe see a plan B, and it certainly got us back into the game.
Yeah, I thought the hind move worked pretty well. I mean, because of McGrath going down, that put Ambrose up forward, and that just left us really top heavy in that forward half. So adding Nick Hind with a bit of speed and a bit of dynamic movement through there, I think not only does it show that he can play that role, but it also shows we probably do need more players that are capable of that up forward. We can't keep relying on Stringer and Tipton-Woody to really provide that spark inside 50. I mean, Perkins can do it as well, but he's still young. So that's probably one area that we could probably look to look at the draft. So someone who can add a bit of speed and excitement up forward. I mean, we've got Ned Carl coming through, who's not exactly a quick player, but an efficient forward. I mean, Snelling, he offers that really good tackling pressure, but he's not quite the quickest either. So, I mean, you look at some of the best forward lines. I mean, even you look at Richmond, and Shea Bolton was that classic example of a player that can really turn the game on with his speed. So we definitely need to find another player like that. But in terms of Rutten's changes and all that, I think that's one of the positives about our squad is we do have a lot of players that can play in numerous positions. I mean, if he wanted to, he could have swapped Hooker, Stewart, Laverty, Ambrose, any of those around if he really wanted to. And you've got guys like Guelphy as well, who didn't have a good night, but he still has the ability to play back. He can play forward. He can play on a wing. Even Langford, who can play in all these type of positions. So he's got a lot of it at his disposal. Even Nick Cox, who got to go into the ruck. So that even might be a strategy that we've used, that we're going to be looking for players who can play multiple positions. I mean, the mid-season pick, we picked that Sam Durham, who can play wing, half-back, half-forward. It's a really important thing to have in your arsenal.
I can see you getting really excited about starting to talk about the draft and entering into your wheelhouse, and we'll get there very, very shortly. I'll just swing to Grizz for one final talk about last night's game. So we have sort of talked about maybe what went wrong. I mean, what went right last night is something we needed to just quickly touch on as well, and I'll get you to do that for us, Grizz, because obviously we had Merritt, Parrish, Langford, Cox, who, fingers crossed, should get a rising star, but we'll see. They were all exceptional again last night. But I mean, outside of that, who else do you think really stood up for us last night?
Yeah, well, if Cox doesn't get the Rising Star nom this week, the Nedsburg Royal Commission. It's quite remarkable what he's done. Yeah, I thought those four, Cox, Parrish, Merritt and Langford, were probably our best. I thought Stringer had some good moments. I think Hooker kicked 3, which is remarkable. I can't remember the 3 goals he kicked, but he seems to be doing that most weeks, which is good, and he's providing a big body up forward for us. Yeah, again, I mentioned before, I thought Redmond was pretty good. He was pretty composed in defence, and so was Ridley. I thought Perkins had a really slow first half, but he really came into it in the third, and I think with McGrath going down, hopefully we might see someone like Perkins get rolled through the middle a bit more. But yeah, I think just overall as well, the fact that we didn't just give up in that last quarter, we didn't roll over, we ran out of leads in the last 10 minutes, but the fight to get ahead in the last 12 minutes showed that when we're on and we're switched on and we're putting the effort in, we can mix it with anyone. So I thought that was really promising. Again, I think Phillips probably got beaten in the first half by Chull, but I think, again, he worked into it more into the second half. But yeah, probably those 4 guys and maybe a couple of special efforts around the ground. I thought Hind as well, like you touched on earlier, was good when he went forward, and he kicked 4 goals in the game for St Kilda, so he has it in him, but we probably needed him down on half-back to give us some speed off there. So hopefully we can bring someone in for that position.
So eDPS, we will turn our attention to the mid-season draft. I'll just ask for your general thoughts to start with, mate. I mean, you've already sort of mentioned our pickup in Durham, but from what I read, and I'll admit I'm not an avid draft watcher. I certainly don't read all the threads. I tend to come draft time and probably read your picks for Essendon and then move on for the rest. But Jacob Edwards seemed to be, to me, the consensus #1 pick. Is that what you thought? Did the draft play out sort of how you expected, or were there a few surprises along the way?
Yeah, I didn't really make too many predictions in terms of the mid-season draft, because even though there are a few names brought up, a lot of clubs aren't going to give away their strategy in such a low pick sort of draft. I mean, there was not a single media outlet that linked Durham to Essendon. So, I mean, a lot of these clubs try and keep it under wraps, and a lot of the media as well just try and speculate who they would take. But Jacob Edwards at 1, I think, was pretty obvious. I mean, he was an absolute star in the first half of this year. I mean, I went to one game that he played in school football. I think he had the 27 touches and 3 goals. So, I mean, he's doing that as a young, developing ruckman. Like, he's still got his best footy years and years to come. If there was no mid-season draft, he probably would have gone top 20. So, like, North Melbourne have really won the lottery on that in that regard.
Yeah, I think North Melbourne's going to need to win a lot more lotteries in the next few years to be able to do all right. Grizz, Did you pay much attention outside of our pick for the mid-season draft? Was there anyone there, I suppose, that surprised you the clubs picked up, or much like me, were you a bit more of a casual observer of the draft time?
No, I did a bit of research into it when I found out we had a second pick, because I thought, oh, here we go, might be able to pick up a couple of guys here. I'm surprised Callow went in the second round. There were a lot of people saying that he was being chased in the first few picks. So for him to go the second round to Hawthorn was interesting. I don't know much about Sam Durham, so I might need eDPS to enlighten us a little bit if he can. But I thought Ash Johnson to Collingwood was interesting. I think another mid-sized X-Factor forward isn't what they needed. They probably needed a Jackson Callow or someone like a Ned Moyle, a bigger player that can give them some structure. But a bit like eDPS said, it seemed really random. It's pretty clear that clubs had very, very, very different draft boards and probably not very big draft boards. I mean, I think we ended up passing on our second pick. So clearly, whoever we were contemplating drafted, they're all gone by our second pick. I'm a bit like you. I only really paid attention to the people we were linked to, but ended up not being worth much considering that I had no idea who Sam Durham was. But I sort of would have liked to have gotten Callow, but at this point, seeing how little I know about them, I'll trust the recruiting staff that they've got a good one there. But yeah, just not to hijack the podcast. eDPS, what do you know about Sam Durham? Can you enlighten people like me who have no idea who he is?
Yeah, so Sam Durham back in 2019 was his first year playing NAB League footy, so they kind of got him from a cricket and basketball background. So he's a really good athlete. So I think he tested well for his vertical leap and for his running capacity. He was very light on, very light-bodied, kind of played wing and half back. He wasn't a really big ball winner back in 2019, so that was probably one of the areas I really wanted to see him improve. Same with his size, because the contested side wasn't quite there because he was so light. But I managed to get a little bit of vision of him playing for Richmond VFL this year, and it just looks like he's come on leaps and bounds, and which is why we definitely wanted to take him. I mean, he's put on a bit of strength. He's definitely looks a bit more confident, and he just looks like he's going to bring that blue-collar style that Ben Rutten really wants. So someone who will have a dip, but also has those athletic qualities, which you really do need in this draft. And as we've seen with some of the players go down, we definitely need some help in that midfield brigade. And although he's not going to be someone in the guts per se, probably more so on a wing, he's still going to be much needed depth for the next few years, because I think that midfield's definitely one we'll need to target.
I'll also just ask eDPS just about the eligibility of players in this draft. So I actually read that a couple of the WA boys had to get permission from their clubs to now play for the Eagles in the Waffle this weekend. If the VFL had played this week, would Durham have been able to play for us? And also, I just want to touch on what was probably the controversial story of the mid-season draft that I saw, and that was John Newcombe and he's nominating his draft terms. It seemed like, I think Sydney were upset because it seemed like he was trying to get the Hawthorn. Do recruiters or draft watchers such as yourself, do you pay attention to any of that noise in the media around that sort of stuff, or do you focus purely on what the player can do, on field and I suppose his off-field attitudes as well, which does come into the contract a little bit, but it's not really something that just because he wants to go to a certain club is not probably a reason to not pick him, I suppose.
Sometimes it does come into some clubs' thinking, because if a player doesn't want to go to their club, they just won't pick him a lot of the time because they're just going to want to leave. With a high pick in a national draft, you'd maybe take the chance that turn him good because they are such a good player. But if you're in the mid-season draft and you interview that player and that player doesn't want to go to you, it's not really worth your trouble. And I mean, the Newcombe pick was an interesting one in terms of the contract size. So obviously, Sam Mitchell in that VFL lineup was pretty adamant that Newcombe's going to be a really good player and did what he could to have Hawthorn pick him. But the problem was a lot of other clubs really liked Newcombe. So they couldn't use the long-term deal as something to keep clubs away from him so they could pick him with their second pick. That was just not going to happen.
Just around the eligibility of players, so there was a couple of WA boys who had to get permission from the Waffle to jump to the Eagles this weekend, and would Durham have faced a similar problem in the VFL jumping from Richmond to Essendon if we'd been able to play this week?
No, I don't think so. I think he would have just been able to play just as normal. I'm pretty sure that's what we were able to do when we got Will Snelling back in 2019. So the issues may have come about because of the whole, the COVID situation we're having right now. But if it wasn't there, I don't think it'd be too much of an issue.
So because we passed on our second pick, was that something that surprised you? I mean, were there any of those speedy sort of forwards that you talked about that we certainly do need now, the Mosquitoes on indefinite leave? So were there any there that we possibly could have picked with that second pick that we passed on?
Yeah, so one of the players that was linked to us, whether we actually wanted to take one or not, was this kid called Max Peskard, who plays for the Gold Coast Academy. I I mean, he's definitely one of those players that has a bit of spark about him, a bit of speed. Doesn't mind his own confidence. He's really got a lot of self-confidence and can really probably rub a lot of opposition the wrong way. So he even looked like a type of player that Richmond would want to go for as well. But I think the main thing that they wanted to do was just see who on their high board was going to be available. Like, obviously, the player that they wanted wasn't there. So they just decided, nah, we'll keep the pick under wraps. I mean, that pick could be used to upgrade a rookie if we need to. And it's also just another delisting you'll have to do at the end of the year. So maybe we don't want to go too far down that route.
Was there anyone that you were hoping we might have a sniff at, that you might, a secret sort of little smoky you had that you were hoping Essendon will link to, that you thought could have made an influence on this group in the second half of the year? Like, for example, I was sort of hoping that we might give Sam Lowson a go from Coburg, because he's very much that small, speedy forward you were alluding to, and he's sort of been playing well in the VFL for a while. But was there anyone that you were sort of thinking would be a good fit for us, or that you were hoping we're having a look at?
Well, yeah, in terms of that dynamic type of forward or midfielder, I mean, the ones that the Richmond took, Matthew Parker was probably the type that I really would have looked at as well, just with his ability to really break open a game. I mean, the week before in the Waffle, he had 25 touches and 4 goals, so he definitely come with some good form under his belt. I mean, I touched on Max Pescott before. I wouldn't say there has been too many. Maybe Corey Preston as well from the Essendon Rangers, another one we will link to. He's another good small forward. But for the most part, I don't think there's been that many good small forwards to really pick from what I saw. I think most of the ones I would have gone for are midfielders with a little bit about them, like a bit of size. And there was Xavier Maher, Liam Conway. You had Charlie McKay, the father-son prospect for Carlton. He's another one I really liked. But I think to find those really dynamic players, I think we'll just have to find them at the end of the year for the national draft.
eDPS, I was just going to ask, so obviously this year, again, we're impacted by COVID. How hard is it for you to only be able to, at the moment, watch games? I suppose, I mean, are you watching them on your laptop, or because you obviously can't get to the games that are in the country at the moment? Is that making your job incredibly difficult, or is, being able to watch it remotely still an acceptable way to do things?
I mean, doing it on my iPad at the moment, it can be unreliable, especially with the NAB League, because it's not run the same way, and some of the games haven't been running too well with the live streams. I mean, I got to do some games early in the year for commentary for some of these games, and they're not even being put up live, so I can't even see those games anymore, which makes it kind of hard, especially for these NAB League kids that I want to see a bit more of. That's why I tried to really get to as much live football as I can while I was down here. I got to a lot of school games, a lot of the NAB League games. I mean, the vision that you can get online is good. Like, it's certainly better than nothing, but I still think watching players live is easily the best way to get a feel for what it is. I think the online stuff is to help just pick on what you may have missed, or because just about every single game that is live that you'd watch online, there will be people who are watching it live at that ground. So it's always good to have both if you need to, but getting to live games is just so important.
How's your draft board looking at the moment, eDPS? Obviously, we're halfway through the year and we haven't played national championships yet. So there's probably a lot to happen between now and whenever the draft is in November. But how's it looking at the moment? Do you have an idea of what, the top 10 or top 20 might look like? And what would you say is probably, with that writer about a lot to go yet, what's probably the deepest sort of group or position in this draft, do you reckon?
Yeah, so I haven't stressed too hard about my rankings so far, because I feel that the national championships will be what really separates them at the moment, especially with the Victorians that have missed a lot of football and haven't quite come on as expected. Right at this stage, I think there's a clear top two, and that is Jason Horn and Nick Dacos. There's a lot of other good players that are not far behind them. Well, probably a little bit far, but, they're still first-round top 10 prospects. But the national championships will be the way to really separate how they are, because I can only watch vision online of the WA and SA clubs, for example, against each other, but you don't really know how good they will be playing against the other state's best players. So my board at the moment with the top 20, it could change so easily, and there's another band of another 20 players that they have a good game in the national championships, they could quickly come into the top 20 as well. The other problem I've had so far this year as well is I haven't had as much access to testing data and to the heights and weights of a lot of these players. I mean, seeing how they grow as well is another important part in projecting how they'll go. So all that data will hopefully come later in the year, but it's just going to be really, really tough to get a good gauge on it right now and who we could look at. But I mean, there are a few names that I do like at the moment that could be around our range, but it's a tough one to say right now.
Which position, I think Grizz just asked before, which position do you think this draft is particularly strong in? Or is it still too early to be able to say, okay, this is a ruckman's draft, this is a forwards draft, this is a draft for midfielders type thing?
I'd say it's pretty good all over the board. I wouldn't say there's one particular position that really sticks out. I mean, the midfield in most years is always good. I mean, you got Horn and Dacos who are good midfielders. If I go through my top 10, I think just about all of them are midfielders except for Josh Gibcus, who's a key defender. So it's probably definitely leaning more to a midfield-heavy draft, but that's not to say that it may not change as the year goes on. There might be a few tools that really come up. I mean, there are a few good halfbacks or utilities that could be around there as well. So I'd probably lean to midfielders, just in an overall sense. A lot of other types of midfielders. There's not just, a heap of tall midfielders, a heap of small midfielders. They're just kind of all over the shop at the moment. But I'd say the rucks are probably a little bit on the lower end, and maybe the dominant key defenders. But apart from that, like the tools, you can't really tell until you see them go head to head against each other at the national championships as well. That will help even separate those in a sense.
So you sort of touched on before with the Victorian kids. Are you finding that the Victorian pool of talent is at all deeper this year, considering the amount of guys who obviously didn't play last year and might not have been drafted? Or like you sort of alluded before, they've sort of not come on how you'd like. Have you seen that with so many guys, with COVID last year, meaning so many guys might not have got drafted, that's affected the Victorian stocks this year? Or is it all pretty much the same as it is most years?
I think it's definitely affected them having that year off. I mean, the under-16 championships in 2019, Vic Metro absolutely dominated the whole field. They beat Country, they beat South Australia, they beat Western Australia with relative ease, really. But the players that really stuck out then haven't quite come on as much. Like, their import's been a bit lower. It doesn't look like a lot of them are as fit as they have been most years as well. Just a few players that may have gotten a little bit complacent as well. I mean, a player who won the best player for the whole championships in Josh Rochelle, some saying he would have been a top 3 pick, but now, I mean, he could even go outside the top 10 just based off his first few weeks. Even though he's been hitting the scoreboard, it just doesn't look like he's really applied himself fitness-wise, and it's kind of brought him down the pack a little bit. So it might just be that he's, waiting for the championships. He knows he's good, but until we see that, it leaves a bit to be desired. But it's unfortunate because a lot of these kids, like a lot of recruiters that I saw when I was watching one of the under-16 trials in 2019, they were ecstatic about what they'd seen from some of these players like Tyler Sonzi and Josh Sin. Like, some of these players were just showing real elite talent. And that's why I really liked what was going to be coming into this year's draft. But so far, they just haven't quite come on. So I'm hoping as the year goes on, they get more football under their belt. I mean, the current lockdown really hasn't helped at all, but you can only be hopeful.
I will just quickly swing to an Eston focus, and don't worry, mate. I'm not about to ask you to give us a tip on who we're going to pick at the end of the year, because it'd be throwing darts at a dartboard at the moment. But I will just ask, do we have any father-sons coming through in this year's draft? And the big question, it was one that we touched on the podcast last week, the Davey twins the following year. How good are they going to be this early out? And are we going to have to spend a lot of draft capital to pick them up the following year?
Starting with the father-sons we could have for this year, we've got Josh Mercedes, the son of Joe Mercedes. He hasn't had the best start to the year. I mean, he's a great kid. He's a good size, but just hasn't quite come on. You've got Nawi Moore, who's the son of Nathan Lovett-Murray. He played today and showed some really nice signs, but he's still coming from a little bit of a ways back, but he has good athleticism. You've also got Tex Wanganeen, the son of Gavin, who's schooling with the Davey twins and will very likely play with them later in the year at Xavier College and at Oakley Chargers. It's hard to say on his development because he did hurt his foot, if I recall correctly, when he trained with us at the start of the year. And Alex Hurd, who hasn't played any NAB League footy, so it's hard to say with him. But, I mean, the Davey twins, now those two are very exciting prospects. I mean, I haven't seen Jaden play live yet, but I have seen Alwyn Jr. play, and he's an absolute star. I mean, both of them look like genuine draft chances. I mean, it's not just from a hyping what we've heard. Like, they genuinely have the runs on the board. I mean, Jaden in his first game from an ACL's kicked 4 goals for Xavier College. I mean, I don't know if you all saw some of the footage that was going on Twitter of Alwyn Jr.'s lovely run on the wing and Jaden Davies' incredible goal kicking on his left foot. It's going to be hard to say where they actually go in the draft next year because there is such a long way to play out, but they're both really, really exciting players.
Do you think, even though it is a fair way out, do you think we will be looking to maybe move on our first round draft pick for next year in this year's trade period? Purely because we know that the Davey twins are coming through next year, similar to, Collingwood did it. They moved their pick on because of Dacos, obviously, for this year. Western Bulldogs moved their pick on last year because of Jamara Ugle-Hagan coming in at pick 1. Do you think we'll probably look to trade that pick, or you think maybe because there's going to be 2 of them, we'll need to hold on to it to be able to maybe have the points?
I see us being a bit more like what Swans did with their pick. I mean, they made sure to have a pick before their bids on Campbell and Goulden to take Logan McDonald. I mean, with Jamara Ugle-Hagan and Nick Dacos, both clubs were really confident they'd be top 3 picks. So they were never going to have a pick that was going to be before those bids anyway. Whereas with the Davey boys, I'd still say they're not going to be top 10 prospects, maybe first rounders, but it's so hard to predict how we'll go next year. Although we're looking like we're improving, I definitely wouldn't get rid of a first round pick early. Maybe at the end of that year if we're kind of confident on where the Davey boys will go, but doing it a year out I think would be really dangerous. I definitely wouldn't do that.
We've got to be careful tempering our expectations next year because I'm sure eDPS could attest this. Development is never linear. Like, you never just get gradually better every year. You see teams like Richmond and, for example, before their recent run of success, they had 3 straight elimination finals and they got out of the finals completely in 2016, got touched up by 120 points by the Sydney. Then next year, they come back and win the flag. So to expect that we'll definitely be better next year than we are now is probably a big assumption. And so I think holding on to that pick is more valuable because even if it turns out that one of the twins turned into a top 5 prospect, trading that pick next year will be more valuable than what we'll get for it this year in terms of a trade because there's uncertainty about where it will fit. But future pick aside, this is probably a question to both of you, Bonser and eDPS. Thinking about recruitment at the end of this year, we've obviously got the draft, but what sort of positions and what sort of depth do you think we're needed as a club going forward? So, for example, I think we're probably at least a midfielder short, at least 1 or 2 midfielders short. We're probably short another halfback, like speedy speedy sort of defensive lockdown small defender, and we're probably short a small forward. But where do you guys both see the holes on our list, and how do you see anyone out of contract or a free agent available that you think would fill that hole? So, for example, if I'm Agent Adora, I'm going hard for George Hewitt as a free agent from Sydney. Big size, defensive-minded midfielder. They can do the tough stuff, and we could get him for free. Considering Sydney might have a bit of a cap crunch at the end of this year and having a lot of midfielders coming up to be re-signed. But what about you guys? What do you guys think is the holes or what do you think are the holes we need to fill, and how would you go about filling them?
Midfielders, I think, are the biggest one for me. Compared to a lot of the top clubs, our midfield depth is not even close. I mean, the most recent VFL game we had, Ned Cahill playing in there, and I think it was the only one from our actual list that was playing in there, and it's just not enough. So we need midfield depth. We need it either in the youth or as mature age players. I mean, Hewitt's not a bad shout in that regard. With the draft as well and going for midfielders, probably even look for midfielders that could potentially play a halfback or half forward role. Picking one with speed, I think, is the most important. I mean, leg speed is just such an important element in the modern game. I mean, it's what separates some of the best forwards, it's what separates some of the best defenders. You've got to have a player that can go with your Cozzy Pickett's in the future. You need players that can shut down some of those types. We have the tools there ready to go. We have a lot of youth there that's really good. I think the tall stocks are absolutely perfect. The ruck stocks, I think, are fine. We've got the Davey twins coming next year, so that might be the small forwards we can cover for that type of thing. So I think midfielders, and hopefully ones that can play a range of roles.
Yeah, look, I was going to say midfielders and also maybe small forwards, but I think you do allude to the fact we do have the Davey twins coming the following year, and I actually have seen some of their highlights on Twitter that you mentioned earlier, and I'm very, very, very hopeful that they will be our answer to our small forward problems. But obviously, we don't want to put too much pressure on the boys just quite yet. So, yeah, look, I think midfielders is definitely the issue. I still think we are probably, I'm not sure if we're a key back short. I think we're definitely that medium defender short. I think Prosecutor has mentioned it a few times on this podcast that we do sort of lack in that area because Ridley can play it, but we don't really want Ridley playing the lockdown role because he's so good with ball in hand. So I'd certainly hope midfielders and maybe a defender is on our radar. In terms of how to fill that void, I definitely hope that we do it via the draft. It would be great if for example, Josh Dunkley is available. It would be great to get him, but I don't want to be trading away our picks and putting all our eggs in one basket. We have had, I think, we have done this before. I mean, we did it with Shield. We traded 2 picks. Now, Shield has been fine and he's been good. Has he been worth what we paid for him? Possibly not. And I don't think we're at that stage where we can draft or trade for the final piece. So I certainly hope we go through the draft rather than trading. If there's a free agent available, then absolutely, because they obviously cost us nothing. But yeah, I mean, I'd certainly be hoping we go to the draft to fill any voids on our list. I'll just come back to you, eDPS, just with a general question about recruitment and how the AFL clubs do it. So we'll use Adrian Dodoro because obviously he's the one that we all know and all our listeners know. How many games interstate would he go to during a year, taking COVID out of it because COVID's completely stuffed everything? Does Adrian spend most weekends on a plane or half the season on a plane going to the Watford, the Stanford, the old NEAFL, which is now obviously the VFL, to watch the youngsters? Or does he stay purely based in Melbourne and he has blokes that he has recruiters and he has staff in each state to look at these players?
I think these days it's mostly Rob Forster Knight who would be going to those interstate games to have a look. And if Adrian Dodoro was to go look at some players, it would be players that he really feels strongly about taking. So he'd more likely probably wait later in the year when he knows what the draft hand is looking like and what players will be available. I mean, I've seen both at games so many times. I haven't seen Adrian Dodoro as much games as he used to be. I mean, he used to go to a lot of games, but now I'm not seeing him at as much. And yeah, I'd say Adrian would just go to games that he feels that strongly that player is going to get taken by that club. But even then, it's also there just to get a sense from the coaches from that particular player. He'd probably more so go over there to interview the players that he likes more so than go to watch to really get a grasp of them. He'd probably already know that he likes them.
So do clubs have staff in every state? I mean, that might seem like a silly question, but do they have people on their payroll in every single state to watch all the youngsters coming through?
Yeah, absolutely. That they'd have at least one person there that they can get to not only watch the games, but ask a lot of questions from coaches and from family members as well to try and get as much information as they can. I mean, like I said before, the vision is good that you can use it, but you need to know a lot more than just the vision. You need to know the circumstances as to why they play poorly or not poorly. You need to ask questions of the coaches. You need to be there to witness any other off-field things that could happen. So it is really important to have a lot of hands on deck all over the states.
And look, I just have one final question for you, mate, before we wrap it up. But Grizz, after we've done this, mate, feel free to throw in any final thoughts you have as well. But Tim Kelly was obviously the mature recruit that all clubs dream of. He came out of the blocks and he started for Geelong and he was a dominant midfielder from day one. Do you think there is now a switch from clubs to look more towards some mature? I mean, as a person, as I said earlier, someone who doesn't really pay attention to a lot of the draft until it's draft night, to me it feels like there's been more mature age players picked in recent years. Is there a trend now amongst clubs to look towards these mature ages? I mean, in the late 2000s, early 2000s, late 2000s, it certainly felt like clubs were going youth, and mature age players. If you didn't get picked up by the time you were 21, you were basically cooked. Is there now more of a focus on mature age from the clubs, or is it still very much a youth draft-based strategy that they're employing?
I think it's mostly from the state of recruitment's just improved so much from back then. I mean, there's more staff, there's more that goes into what they do, and more vision. There's more people they can hire. There's just so many other avenues that they can look at now that they can see that, hey, these players, these Marlon Pickett's, these Tim Kellys, they're just coming in and just starring once they come to AFL level. Those type of players may not have got that opportunity just because there just hasn't been enough people to watch them and do the research. So now that opportunity is there, that's why you're seeing so much more mature age players coming in and playing well. I mean, Tom Stewart, another great example. I mean, clubs are identifying these guys. They're even getting out to these local football games. I mean, these amateur games, these school games. There's just so many different variety of places they can go to really get the best players for their club, get them in their VFL, and then bring them up. So I'd say it's got a lot to do with just the whole landscape of recruiting just improving out of sight.
Yeah, and I wonder also if it's got something to do with we've got 2 extra teams in the competition since 2010, which means there's roughly 80 more players in the AFL. And all that to say, I wonder if it's got something to do with talent pool. Maybe the guy that you take at pick 60 in 2008 might be far more talented than the guy you'll find at pick 60. It's just because the talent's a bit thinner. So at least if you go with a state or a mature age player, you've probably got more of a handle on what they're going to be at senior level than that sort of speculative pick late in a draft. I think you still see the majority of first, second and third rounders be these 18-year-olds, with the exceptional, obviously, sort of Tim Kelly thrown in there for good measure. But I think, I think the talent pool sort of thinned out a bit with some extra teams, and so I just wonder if senior, sort of more mature talent in VFL just gives recruiters trying to find that player 32 to 40 on their list a bit more surety about the role they can play, and so those guys are getting picked up a bit more. But yeah, I think, like eDPS said, there's just so much more maturity about recruiting nowadays, knowing that some guys just bloom late. Like we picked up a guy who's only 20 now in Sam Durham, and 2 years ago he was probably far more speculative, but just a couple of years in the system and you have a much better grasp of what he's going to be. So yeah, I don't mind picking up mature age players, and I think they're great for picking up and filling holes in your list. Like Nick Hind was picked up as a 26-year-old and he's adapted to the AFL life pretty quickly, and I think they're great for filling really specific holes in your list. I think that's where the maturities come in, list management.
Yeah, look, and I think you've actually probably nailed a really good point there, Grizz, in that with the 2 extra teams, the talent pool probably did get a little bit shallower, so they were forced to turn to other avenues, which may have led to a more recruiting of mature players alongside the maturity in recruiting that the eDPS has mentioned. But unfortunately, lads, we don't actually get to do Bonce's quiz this week because we are running very long, and Beerfish is probably wanting to kill me right now for letting it run so long. But eDPS, you were giving us quite some interesting insights. So we have run a little bit longer than normal just because what you were saying was fascinating. Well, it was to me anyway, so I hope it was to everybody else. But thanks for coming on tonight, mate. It's been great, and hopefully we'll get you back on later in the year when the draft hand and the draft quality is a little bit more firmer, a little bit more surety around it, and then we'll get you back into to give us some insights into what you think we'll pick up later in the year.
Yeah, it's been great to chat to you fellas. I'd love to come on again. It's been a good night.
And Grizz, as always, mate, it's been great. And thank you again for jumping on this evening.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
So that will wrap us up for this version of our podcast. Now, next week, obviously, we do have the bye. So next week's podcast will be a little bit different. We'll be doing a bit more of a season review than a review of a game. And I will be joined by 2 of our board's most favourite posters in Dero and Jamu. So I look forward to doing that. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you again next week.